54 Bel Airror at this point has a new trunk pan installed. It's full of crap right now, so you can't see it. Tail pan's been repaired, rear crossmember's been repaired. I thought I'd show what we were working with before we got started. So here's what's left of the original trunk pan. And you can see we have severe rust over on this side. My father, years ago, had used roofing cement to patch in where metal was missing. The extensions, the trunk extensions, are completely gone. You can see the imprint of the trunk mat that the roofing cement had conformed to. Also, that's the low spot there for the jack base to be inserted in. There's rust out in the spare tire well. The rear cross member, I don't know if rear cross member is the right word, but the brace underneath the back of the trunk, that was largely rotted away. The rear body mount was just completely sagged out. The corner of the car was actually sitting on the bumper filler panel to help provide structure. So you can see here up into the body mount. This body mount here is rusted. And, there's what's left of the pad. Here's the inner wheelhouse where the trunk attaches. And the top part here wasn't so bad. Where it met the floor, it was a little soft. But up here, where the shock mounts are and everything, that was all solid. You can see how we used a cutting wheel and made many pieces to get in there and drill out or grind out spot welds and separate everything as nicely as possible. This body mount wasn't in as bad a shape, but still, what are you gonna do? The center of the trunk floor was pretty solid, but over here, it was all thin. The trunk extension on here, the driver's side, was completely missing. Even the fuel filler protector was rotted out. That's since been sandblasted and welded up. And of course the trunk extension was gone on this side too. So I've saved every last little piece that I cut off, grinded off, or otherwise split off with a chisel. And try to save these pieces in order to put the new one in. If I need clues, I keep the old stuff around. Going to be moving shortly, so I do need to discard this trunk pan. So what we're going to do is we're going to save this piece here. We're going to save the rubber grommets out of it, possibly the mounting bolts for the fuel tank. They're included on the new pan, but just in case there's a difference of some sort. So let's take a look underneath. You can see here's the rear brace that I mentioned, the body mount completely gone. And same on the other side. So the back of the car was sagged down pretty bad. The center of the trunk floor doesn't look so bad from this angle. Here you can get a feel for the spare tire well. And there you can see some of my dad's handiwork, not only with roof cement, but with screen door screening as well. The interesting thing about that style of patch is I was cutting it out with the wheel. The patch would fuse itself back together just as the heat dissipated. So it was sort of a self-healing patch. So maybe it wasn't such a bad thing after all. One other point, I did save the little mounting hardware. I'll be cutting this guy out as well. The new trunk floor came with it, but just in case, I want to try and have original stuff to look at. I'll be saving this tab as well. I've cut a few new ones out of sheet metal. I think they're 22 gauge, but in any case, having an original one's not too bad. The new trunk floor came with them, but there are some of those installed on the trunk extensions, which I had to build, and I have not included those tabs yet. Those tabs are there for the purpose of mounting the cardboard, the trunk interior finish, if you will. One other point, here are the rear crossmember sections that I cut out. See if this is bright enough to see. Well, I had the back of the car apart. Oh, we need a light on there. Let's grab a light. Well, I had the back of the car apart. I cut out the top part of this rear crossmember and I welded in new material. That's 14 gauge, fairly heavy steel. And from here, you really can't tell that that's not a factory piece. More to come. Here are some shots with the trunk pan installed from the tail panel perspective. You can see where the tail panel's blended in with the original back panel. You can see where I've made the patches there to the trunk bumper supports. Haven't welded in yet. And here's the seam, the rosette welds or spot welds with the tail pan to the trunk pan. There's the trunk latch, nothing fancy there, just welded back to the tail pan about where it used to be. That would be the new one that came with the trunk pan welded to the old tail pan. And here you can see the other bumper support and the trunk extension. And the other trunk extensions here underneath the fuel filler protector. That's just sheet metal screwed in for the time being. In any case, the factory seam, these pieces were welded underneath the trunk pan, but wasn't able to replicate that given the dynamics of things here. So there's a slight variation from stock. And here's the completed welded in trunk floor with the extensions. I have masking tape on the seams because I haven't seam sealed it yet. I'm still doing a lot of grinding and messy work, so I don't want that to get into the seam before I seam seal it. Here's the other trunk extension. And here's a good example of where the body mounts are. You have one up here and one back here, same on both sides. So if you have a deteriorated trunk floor as badly as mine, you're really missing the support for the whole rear of the car. Before I got started and did any cutting, and also being unsure of how and what I was going to replace the rotten metal, I took a lot of measurements. So took the outside measurements, latch position and bumpers and the like, and then the position of all the tabs and mounts on the passenger side. Similarly, the position of all the tabs and mounts on the driver's side, including the body mounts. And finally, the locations of tabs and mounts from the top and the back perspective. Never hurts to have too much information, I suppose, even wheel well details. So the trunk had a series, the original trunk had a series of these tabs that were bent up vertically to help hold the trunk cardboards in place. Here's an example of one that I had cut out of the original trunk floor. In fact, that's probably the only one that was worthy of saving. In case there's a new one on the trunk floor on that side, but unfortunately most of these were located on the trunk extensions. So they didn't come with the new trunk floor. So I've had to fabricate them. What I did is created a template from the One Good original, and I've begun to cut out replacements out of 22 gauge metal. So I'm trying to match the original gauges of metal as closely as I can when I make these things. And 22 gauge seems to be what these finer things are made out of, this in particular. These heavier things are 16 gauge. And of course, we're fortunate that they came with the new panel. In any case, that's a tip. Regarding thicknesses of metal, the outer body sheet metal is 19 gauge. Seems to be the General Motors standard during this era. The inner panels, however, they seem to be somewhat slightly thinner. They seem to be closer to 20 gauge, and this stuff seems to be softer. I did encounter, you can see some of the ugly patching in there. I made the patches, the wheel well patches, out of 18 gauge, and then trying to weld it to this thinner, softer, possibly 20 gauge, and then of course in a confined space, welding inside the wheel well or inside the trunk. I had experienced a lot of burn through and a lot of issues. So in any case, I would probably, if I had to do that again, I probably would have used 20 gauge instead of 18 for my patches. And for the trunk extensions here, because I had to put a curve in it and stretch it to get it at a curved angle, I used 20 gauge. The replacement trunk is 18 gauge, which matching the 18 and the 20 is fine. But just for ease of bending, I chose 20, which I think is close to the original and structurally adequate.